violent crime, and me, the perfect angel here on Earth. Now, I'm not sure this is gonna make sense to people, but I'm gonna try because I think it's interesting. Someone pointed out to me last week or 2 weeks ago or something. Like you approach like confrontations and situations as if you are completely defenseless. And what they mean by that is I approach the situation as if the person doing whatever they're doing is doing it to someone who is completely defenseless. So, in essence, like what they are doing is that much worse in my eyes. Because, like, someone who would do something to a person who's completely defenseless is obviously a very bad person. And so anyone who would do something to me is obviously a terrible person. We can all be sure of that. And I thought this was interesting because I know because of stuff that happened in my early life, part of my brain is frozen as like believing it's a child. And I constantly have to remind myself in certain situations, like, you are not a child. It's a weird thing. And like you would think, like, just looking, it would be obvious and something that like there would be no question about, and yet there is. What interests me, I mean, that is kind of interesting on its own, but at least to me, but expanding that outward to other people who might not have the words I do, that is what is kind of interesting to me. Because I've said before, usually when you have a violent criminal, they don't see the person they're hurting as a victim. They see themselves as the victim. And the person they are hurting is not necessarily not necessarily responsible, but they are at least complicit in the person's victimization. Like, they didn't care, they didn't do anything. Succinctly put, fuck them. And that's generally the attitude. Like, you can have a guy that is 6'4" and swole robbing an old woman, and he will see himself as the victim and her as the aggressor in some way. Now, granted, he won't be able to verbalize that for the most part, but that is what's going on in their brain, at least. And I wonder, because most of these people, like, you rarely, I would go as far as to say never, have a violent criminal that did not get raised in violence. It doesn't happen. Like, you need certain pieces to be in place for a person to do certain things. And you won't have a person arrive at the decisions that hurting other people is banal and fine if they don't have those pieces already in place. Like, the brain won't work that way. I was outside walking and there was a spider web, and now I'm convinced there's a spider on my head. It's irrelevant. It's driving me fucking crazy though. But I do wonder if that is kind of what's going on. Furthermore, they see themselves as defenseless. Like, the offense is that much greater. Their victimization is that much greater because they are defenseless. And because, like, part of their brain is stuck at that age. And I had my therapist once said to me, uh, because I don't remember what had happened, but it was some violent act. And she's like, of course you do, because you behave like a child. And what she meant is like someone did something to me, so I'm going to do something worse to them. And this is a perfectly like logical process to me. You have wronged me, I will wrong you worse. That makes sense. Like, if someone's going to put their hands on me or do something to me, then I'm going to do that much worse to them. Like, you want to discourage any further action, of course. So you want to be pretty severe in your choices. Um, but I wonder if like that juvenile part of the mind is like essentially frozen in most violent criminals, and like they're never going to get beyond it because of upbringing. And once again, I always say it, I know it's cliche to blame so much on upbringing, but like to understand this, you have to understand this. And if you don't have this in order, then you'll never understand the big picture, and you'll make absurd conclusions. And, arguably what I'm saying sounds absurd. I'm aware of that. But I'm pretty confident in my assessments of myself. I am viciously honest with myself. It is something I try very hard to be. And I'm certain there are ways I still lie to myself and just don't know it. But I try very hard to be very cruel and very direct about things. I'm willing to acknowledge unfortunate and unhappy things about myself, despite the way I depict myself as the perfect angel here on earth. I am willing to acknowledge that there are terrible things that I am capable of and have done things for the wrong reasons. I am If someone isn't willing to confront those parts of themselves, I mean, their mind is still kind of stuck in a very juvenile place in a different way. And I find most people's minds are, especially with sex. Uh, it freaks me out when 40-year-olds giggle when I mention sex. And like that's a trip to me that like people have gotten this far in life. Irrelevant. I'm going to end up ranting about this. But I believe all kinds of people's minds are stuck in juvenile places and they just don't see it that way, or at least what I am defining as stuck in a juvenile way. And I think with violent criminals, the mind is trapped, or at least part of the mind, obviously not the whole mind. And I am not trying to paint violent criminals in a sympathetic light. Um, like, if you do something, you gotta pay. Uh, like that's just the way it works. And so whatever that punishment might be, and if it's a hanging offense, you made your choice. We all make our choices. But nevertheless, I still like to understand things. How does a person arrive at the conclusions they do? Because outside of situations like war and stuff, violence seems like something most adults don't do. And therefore, it is not like an adult frame of mind to commit violence. And usually, there is some impediment that a person's brain has, especially if violence is right up at the top of the list. You can be pretty certain there was some disturbing stuff early in life that put violence as a viable solution for most problems, because you can't get anywhere in life like that for the most part. I mean, I suppose you can become like a music star or a football player or something like that and get away with it. But as far as generally existing within society, if you use violence on any kind of regular means, you're going to be incarcerated at some point. And once you're incarcerated, you're pretty much like part of the outcast. Like you can move forward with your life, but it's going to be that much more difficult. So I wonder, like, are because I will frequently say, oftentimes people have like an awakening when they get to be like 30 years old or so. They begin to feel some type of guilt or shame, sometimes both, about the things they've done. They become aware that like other people exist. I guess it's something that most people develop earlier in life, but some of us don't for one reason or another. Anyway, this has been rambling and incoherent and nonsensical, and I'm going to stop now because I have to leave. But I do wonder, like, is that part of the issue? Is the person's brain stuck in a juvenile place and like kind of just frozen there? Not even a large part of the brain necessarily, but a part of the brain that makes this a reasonable decision. Take it for what it's worth.